there was a large donut at our local donut shop that was in the shape of a clown. And it had a kind of a poof of donut for the head, and then 4 poofs for the 2 legs and the 2 arms. And then it was frosted to look like a clown. And it was large, it was about this big. And if you had been brave at the doctor or done something admirable, my mother would take you as a reward for a donut. And I realized at about 3 that that was 1 donut, but it was the size of 2.5 donuts. So I was very excited at having gained the system. And also it was in the shape of a clown and had a face. I mean, it was like a toy and a donut. And this donut just filled me with joy. And then the other thing that I loved was rabbits. And I had a whole identity for myself as a rabbit. And I used to talk to my best friend about what my life would be like when I was his rabbit, and the house that I would live in and what I would eat. And anyway, I sat down with a crayon and I drew a kind of a hybrid of that donut and that rabbit. It was the poofs for the legs and the arms, and then the head was a rabbit head, and it had a face. And I had like in my memory, I had what Agnes Martin calls full body joy. Agnes Martin talks about always that what she was trying to achieve in the making of her work was a joy that consumed her being. And I think I had an experience of that joy in that moment of seeing that rabbit, because it was exactly correct. And that was probably the moment when I thought, this is what I should do. And then we had a sculptor, a pretty well-known Art Deco era sculptor named George Genuine living next door. And I knew him. I sat for him. He carved a bas-relief of my face. He would play Santa Claus for the neighborhood kids. And so I had a sense that he was the dad in that family, supporting his family, going into the city, that could be a job. I was lucky enough to find out very, very early that that was a job you could do. Mm. So from a very early age, that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and it is true that it matters to know people and obviously have supportive parents and all of those things, but you also have those strong kind of creation moment memories. So
yeah, right. And then if you're a kid, you just have to know it's possible. You have to see people near you or who look like you or close to you doing that thing. That's really how children understand what's possible for them. And I was lucky enough to kind of plunk down in that situation. And also my mom painted from about the time I was 6 years old. I watched my mom. She was an educator. She worked with learning disabilities in math and reading, but I went to art fairs with my mother. I watched her sell paintings. I watched her own sort of joy at watching someone come along and buy a piece of her work and know it was going to go off to New Jersey and be on somebody's wall. So that was lucky too.
And so today we're going to talk specifically in a few minutes about your project Gone and Forever, and people will see all the different things that you kind of brought together. But I would love to hear you talk about from that moment of childhood until through your childhood and you got to RISD, some other of these artistic experiences that were important. I think like when you went to work with a theater coach, and maybe talk about a few of those moments that brought you to this place where you are now making a work of art that is a Gesamtkunstwerk, if I may.
Sure.
Total work of art.
So my first gig, my first gig actually was a ceramic commission. I was working, I was 13 or 14, and I got a job working for Marilyn Dinton-Fass, who's a fairly well-known ceramic sculptor who was doing wall installations in the 1980s for large public works and in pigmented porcelain. And I consumed probably 500 pounds of raw pigment while working for Marilyn without a mask, but that's fine. So our neighbor commissioned me to make a creche in Porcelain. So weirdly, my first paid gig is that, but my second paid gig was as a kid actor in a kind of a funny cable TV theater company, singing a short story by Delmore Schwartz called In Dreams Begin Responsibilities, and working with a director named Elizabeth Swados, who was a composer and a director, and also a novelist and also an artist, actually. And as I've been, for the first time in my career, building something which has aspects of theater, what we're building is a public procession that will move through public space and involves music and involves language. So I've been thinking back actually a lot to her. She was really my first great teacher. I met her, more luck, but I worked with her when I was 13 and 14, and she shaped my head a lot in terms of how you can bring elements together in a work of theater that are visual, theatrical, auditory, musical, and that the amassing of those elements can make something sort of like a cheesesteak. You have onion, you have cheese whiz, you have meat, and you have the roll. And on their own, they all have separate qualities, but they amalgamate into this extraordinary kind of gorgeousness when they are brought together in the right way.
Yes, we're
Cheesesteak
really,
School of art making.
we're really whetting everyone's appetite for
It's lunch.
hearing about the project, because I'm still not going to ask you about that, because that next I want to ask how you came back to clay.
So this crazy woman walked into my store one day. So one of the great lessons from my mother was to know that you could do something if you had a decent brain, and that even if you didn't have experience doing it, if you had a decent mind, you should say, yes, I can do that. My mother lost a job once because they asked her if she could run a math conference. And she said, well, I don't know, I've never run a math conference, and she didn't get the job. And when she was speaking to her boss and mentor, her boss said, you always say, yes, of course I can do that. Are you an intelligent person? My mom said, yeah, I'm very smart. And she said, well, then you can do anything. Just always say you can do it. So anyway, it was very nice out. I remember it was about 75 degrees. And you walked into my store. And we'd gotten to know each other a tiny bit from working for Kraft Now, kind of as thinking partners with them. And you walked into my store, and I had a shop called Stadler Con, and I carried the work mostly of Philadelphia artists and designers. It was kind of a design lab, gallery, vintage store hybrid that I had for about 6 years. And Jennifer, you walked in and asked me if I knew of anybody that could create a series of menorahs for the clay studio that could be a visiting artist and make menorahs to sell at the holidays. And I said, yeah, me. And you, like a fool, believed me. And I hadn't worked in clay since I was 14 and working for Marilyn Dittenfast, but I had been longing for it. Every year at some point, I said, oh, I got to get over to the clay studio. I have to do that. I have to do that. And that was 20 years of doing that and not doing it. And so you agreed, and you set me up with Dominique Ellis as my tech. And Dominique did glaze tests. I was very interested, and still am, in flow glue and the drip and run and bleed of flow glue. And Dominique developed a glaze technique that would give me that flow. I draw with a very wobbly line. I have a shaky hand, and my illustration work is always wonky. And Dominique gave me the ability to bring that graphic quality, that wonk, to my ceramic work. And we created the menorahs, which I don't think we have an image of, but they were.
They have this quality.
They have that quality. And very quickly, I signed up for a hand building class and very quickly began to make vessels and cups and take great joy in working in 3 dimensions and seeing the way that all the kind of graphic systems I'd been developing for 25 years would play out if I brought them into 3D. And then that was just that. That was, I guess, 5 years ago.
Time is a flat circle. I don't know.
I have no idea.
I think it was
Something
5 years
5,
ago.
6 years ago, I became an associate at the Clay Studio. The Clay Studio became my clubhouse, my workshop. Just brought me a lot of joy, and this working in clay just sort of has gone on kind of endlessly from there, almost like something that was just waiting for me to sort of wake it up.
That's lovely. And I have to also say, of course, that Josie is always integral to these things, because I come and say, so I met this person and he could do this. Is that okay?
He said he could do it.
Can we figure this out? And Josie always says yes, and always figures it out. Because when people want to work with clay and touch clay, that's what brings us joy. So that's lovely. So then this nice installation, on my screen, it doesn't have that, so I don't know how to move it. This was your exhibition that was putting together all kinds of work that you do, and I don't have an image of the other wall, which had your illustration work.
But even so, I'm always working in about 4 disciplines at any given time. You can see that there's a carpet, which was actually milled by one of the last remaining carpet mills in the United States, which is Langhorne Carpet Company, right 40 minutes from here. That's a carpet called Josephine. That's a series of oil paintings I had been working on at that time, and that's the ceramic work. So I was happy, thank you to Jennifer, I had the opportunity to make a little world in the Bonnevitt space.
Yeah,
a little universe.
Great. So and I wanted to just note this, the idea that you work in all these different media often simultaneously, and you have, a very strong visual language when it comes to your illustration. So we can use this as our jumping off point to dig now deeper into Gone and Forever. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what inspired this project?
Yeah, I was eating breakfast against my will at the IHOP. I don't like IHOP. But Chris Bartlett, who was then and still is the director of the William Way LGBTQ Center here in Philadelphia, and I have been friends since we were ACT UP protesters in Providence, Rhode Island, back in the 80s. And we were having breakfast, and Chris was talking to me about some kind of social archival work that he had been doing, really investigating the early years of the AIDS crisis in Philadelphia and interviewing people and trying to create a bank of information that people could visit. And in the process of doing that, he'd been speaking to a funeral director who was active at that time, and who at that time was one of the few in Philadelphia who would, in those early years, 82, 83, 84, when the bodies of people who were struggling with AIDS or who had died from AIDS, when those bodies were considered toxic by the general public, he was one of the few funeral directors who would receive a body and embalm or cremate that body and give you space in your chapel, in his chapel, for a memorial. And he also discussed the issue at that time of remains, cremated remains remaining unclaimed on his shelves. And very quickly in that conversation, probably just because I'm a middle child and I like to fix things and make bridges, I thought, oh, okay, well, we can solve that problem of these unclaimed people, and we can solve that problem of these unclaimed memories, because that's unfinished business. Really, societally, we still have not dealt with the way that we turned our back on those people and showed a profound absence of compassion. This was pre-COVID, ironically. But anyway, in that minute, I thought, oh, well, okay, I know what to do. I'll make the urns. I can get a textile artist to make the shroud. I can have a composer write an elegy. I can have costume processioners. I've been visiting the Backstreet Cultural Museum in New Orleans a lot, in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, where they house the costumes of the Black Indian troops and of the second line troops, which are these expansive costumes that often are brought out in the service, both of Mardi Gras parades, in the case of the Black Indian troops, but in the case of the second line troops, they are brought out for memorial processions. So I thought, oh, well, we'll have all of this. We'll make a procession. And Chris had work that he wanted to do in terms of creating a real archive about this time. And we began to talk with a theater director and with someone with Wahida Shabazz El about directing the listening sessions that would interview people who had survived that time, lost in that time, worked in that time, fought in that time. And we built a whole program called Remembrance, which would have all these different components: the archive, a theatrical production, the procession and ceremony, and the listening sessions. And we brought it to Pew as an application and applied, and we're very fortunate to get the grant. So that's how it started. And I think we received our grant the same year you did for Making Place Matter, which is 2019.
2019. It seems like 1999.
So yeah, so all that happened while eating lousy pancakes.
It just sort of appeared.
When I work as an educator, I really try to direct my students away from the idea of receiving inspiration or courting the muse. I don't think it's a useful practice for any artist to wait to be inspired. I think the development of a practice where you just get to work and allow the back of your mind to come to the forefront has much greater utility. But in this case, I will say that strangely, this idea presented itself almost fully formed in about 3 minutes. It was a very funny experience.
I think it's that the use of the utilitarian, functional, pragmatic way of getting to work that kind of prepares your brain to sometimes be able to receive those things.
Yeah, it's like, I guess if you're a gymnast, it's about, or a ballet dancer, it's about having the technique at your fingertips so that in those moments of inspiration, you can fly. Yeah, maybe that's true.
Or a musician as well.
Yeah.
So we can, let's.
Which is funny because technically I'm such a lousy ceramic artist. I basically have the skill set of a third grader who's taken a scratch and patch class.
Well, I don't think that that's true, but I think that the point is that you sit down and you do it. You physically work at it all the time. You don't think, oh, I'm bad at this, I'm not going to do it. You just keep working, and that's what has.
Yeah, that's
the work.
Yeah.
And it's almost that the work that you're doing in ceramics, it's not limited to inspiration in ceramic, right? It's like the functional part of being an artist that allows you to then have the inspiration that can encompass all the other things. And it's, I mean, being an illustrator, I think is the same in that you have to draw every day. You told me when you give yourself an assignment, you have to draw something every day. It's so that you will have those moments when you're like, oh, okay. And then it comes together and you figure it all out.
Yeah, Linda Barry has this beautiful book, Syllabus, about creative practice, and it's tremendously useful book for anyone really at any stage of involvement with creative practice. But she talks about how used to being told to shut up the back of your mind is. The executive portion of your brain is used to kind of running the show and telling you that the imaginative side of yourself should be quiet, and that because of that, you need to give the back of the mind cues that it's its moment to come forward. She talks about the act of shutting off the phone, but a regular, and mine is a wonky regular, but I think, yeah, a regular creative practice has utility in that way.
So that kind of brings us to the ceramic aspects of the project. So we can sort of start from there and then move out to the other people who you invited. So you conceived of the procession, and the central element are these urns.
Yeah, and it was very clear to me that I would make these urns. I began sketching them on large pieces of paper with hunks of charcoal. And
Try to fix.
So they start with a series of these images. You can see very clearly in my work how important Betty Woodman's work is to me. And this idea, I always feel like if Matisse had seen Woodman's work, he would have seen, oh my God, I took 3D and I flattened it, and she has taken 2D and expanded it into three-dimensional space. But that dance of compressed graphic and three-dimensional space that their work tosses back and forth. That ball is a ball I'm very interested in tossing. So, and then there were a lot of reasons to have them be winged, but I also wanted them to have a monumental quality. So I had to work much larger than I'd ever worked before. And what I was luckily too stupid to understand was that gravity really steps to the forefront of your ceramic practice when you work on large scale, and that issues that will never have come up when you're making a little cup. When you make something that's 2 feet high, gravity is going to do with you what she wishes. So luckily, through a series of happy and maybe directed accidents, I found my way to Tyler Goulden, who was my Tenzing Norgay, who was the person that got me to the top of the mountain. And I live in Maine now. Tyler was about 45 minutes away. And because of the Pew grant, I was able to do something I've never done before, which was hire someone with the technical skill to create or help me create the thing that was in my mind. And through Tyler Goulden's expertise, both in terms of his knowledge of kilns and the chemistry and physics of ceramics, I was able to make from those sketches these 22-inch high vessels, winged vessels that had what I had wanted from the beginning, which was an almost brutalist or Mayan level of visual gravity and physical gravity, and at the same time a winged quality that presented the idea of something open to the sky.
And is that how you came to the, so if you look at these holes, they're actually tubes that are going from one slab to the other. Was that, and I know that now they're kind of serving this purpose that in a moment we'll see that they're gilded and they're throwing light, but what was the initial, the structural?
So if you think about them as ice cream sandwiches, the exterior surfaces, which were slab rolled and built and then rough cut from templates, then we had to assemble the piece and stand it up on its foot. And then at a leather hard stage, I would begin to do the carving.
The exterior
carving and come to the final form. We needed a strong structure between the two cookie layers. The ice cream layer had to be very strong structurally. And if we had not created those extruded tubes in between my perforated circles, the wings would have flown out in both directions. And I wanted these things to be flat. They're about 4 or 5 inches thick. So the tubes initially were a structural component, but then when I realized that I wanted them gilded, they're carried in the procession at shoulder height. That comes from the idea of the St. Joseph's Day parades, which start in Sicily and come over to the US and are actually an early antecedent of some of the Mardi Gras traditions. Come from those early St. Joseph's Day parades and the idea of carrying the saints at shoulder height above the crowd, removing them from the church and bringing them out into public space the carved saints, which are gilded, are carried high above the crowd, and they find life in a way like the Ravenna mosaics or like gilded work. It's causing light to bounce and move across the object. And so it is in a way to resist making what you could think of as a graven image, because the object is still, but the light is in motion. And so you're imbuing the thing with life. So I wanted them gilded, and then it turned out that the tubes act as channels of light. You can, as they move, you can watch the world through the tubes. You get these little glimpses. So they are porous in a way to their environment, but then also we glaze the interior of the tube so that they bounce the light of the gilding through that little light channel, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't, well.
Come on Saturday.
Yeah.
And the facades are not glazed, and they sort of have this very chocolatey surface that is matte and beautiful and very clay. I mean, it's like very obvious what they're made out of.
One of my fellow associates, Len Barak, introduced me to this clay, which when you're working with it, feels and looks like chocolate cookie dough. It's just absolutely delicious to work with, but it comes out of the kiln, this gorgeous black brown of an espresso coffee. And it is in its raw state. It has a roughness. Some people have mistaken them for rusted metal. It has an extraordinary quality. And for me, because it's not a skin on the clay, it is the clay itself. They have an integrity to me that I wouldn't have gotten if I had painted them.
Yeah. Well, right, and they're so graphic without anything else on them. And that quality, the graphic quality, is something I remember you telling me about. Was, you said you made them with Tyler. You really did. It's not like he made them and you watched. You were in there, and one of the moments was when he tried to do the cutout, but he made it too perfect.
We had an interesting conversation before he knew me as a person or as an artist. I thought that, we were using a template, and I mistakenly thought that I could turn some general cutting over to Tyler. And Tyler, who does beautiful work, which does have a kind of a balance and a perfection that even if I wanted to achieve it, I could not. I have I take tremendous joy in technically perfect and balanced work, but it is not the way I work. I realized in that moment I had to make every cut, because the cuts, the wonk is my language. And that even in the translation from the template to the piece, there's all these funny moments. Even with the gilding, I would never turn the gilding over to another person, because my gilding cracks, my gilding breaks, and I'm very interested philosophically and aesthetically in cracks and breaks.
Yeah, it's appropriate for the project. Oops. So here's some action photos of gilding the pieces and welcoming the cracks. And then I'd love to talk a little bit about the other people who you invited in to your project, or invited to be partners with you. And we have happily some lovely little videos. Do you want to pick someone to start with, and I'll play their video?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, you can see in the back of that photograph that was just showing, or in that central photo, the fibers hanging down, or that one of there's an artist, Liz Collins. Liz is a really extraordinary artist who works in sculpture. She paints in needlework. She creates entire environments. I love Liz's work. And we've known each other since 1986 or 7. This was our first opportunity to work together, and Liz Collins created the shrouds. So this fabric, and you can see Liz talking about the indigo dyeing in this video, but this is a fabric which is milled in silk from Liz's design and has a synthetic raffia that drops down. like rain or tears from the silk.
Indigo is this natural dye that's really rich, and the kind of tones that you get from it are unique, and that's why people do it all the time, because it's this special kind of spectrum of blues that you get from like deep blue or light blue that have a richness that I don't think you get from regular dyes. And so I wanted to do that special process that this kind of shade of blue that felt right for the project. I feel this real somberness, you know, an appropriate somberness to the color. It's kind of night, like the nighttime during the day, you know, the sky, like turning the night sky, the eternal night sky that happens with that. Indigo is this natural.
So one of the things that we talked about was the fact that you have these very people who are involved in the project who are very close to you, who've known for a long time, like Liz.
Like
and then
Liz.
Others who you intentionally went out into different communities and wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I should sort of list the collaborators on the project, because this has been one of the real gifts of receiving the Pew Grant, was that I could call artists on the phone and say, I have money, I want you to make something for me. That was just tremendous, tremendous. Making those phone calls was tremendous, and then seeing what they built. So Liz created the shrouds, which function, obviously there's the idea of a shroud which would wrap the body or protect the body after death and in some way purify it. Liz's also function, they're held like huppahs would be. They are canopies, and so they function hanging above the urns as shelters for them too. So we have 3 of these palanquins that get held at shoulder height. And over those palanquins, a palanquin's like what Cleopatra would enter the stage in on, held at shoulder height. And then I have ceremonial costume, some of which is created by the Henry. And maybe if we have time, we can see his video, or you can see it on my Instagram. The Henry created this kind of angelic armor for the carriers of the urns. And his idea was really that if you were going to rely on someone to transport you from this life to the next, you would want that person to be endowed with superhuman strength. And so he created these kind of hypermuscular metal mesh transparent suits of armor for those people. And then Claire Fleury, who created the more ceremonial costume, and there's a great video there of one of her pieces in motion. Claire comes from club fashion and dance fashion and costuming, and she built 8 individual works that are ceremonial costumes that will accompany all of these pieces. And we talked a lot about the second line troops and the Black Indian troops, and the way that the costuming expands the body out into space and draws space into the body, that the body becomes more. So her costumings there were a variety of different ways. I asked each artist really to think about their work functioning as an intermediary between the celestial and the terrestrial. What are the ways we draw the spirit down and help the soul up and out?
So that one to me looks like one of your drawings.
With the cubes, Claire's piece. And it's interesting, Claire and I don't have a long history of knowing each other's work, but that piece is an extraordinary piece. And she said that it was also very much inspired by the biology of the disease and the individuality of AIDS, and the way it tailored itself and mutated itself depending on whose body it was in. And that's a very strange and awful and beautiful truth of that disease. Is there were people who were sick and gone in 3 months. There were people who never became ill. There were people whose illness went back and forth over a period of many years, and I think we really began to understand more about the nature of a body and an illness and the individuality of a body.
So what's going to happen on Saturday will encompass all of these things, and what we haven't yet talked about is the music.
So there's a live stream link that you can get at waygay.org/remembrance. And maybe we can print that or show that. You can find also the link at Alex Stadler Artwork, which is my Instagram. That is a live stream if you cannot be at the ceremony. The ceremony consists of a piece called Untold Elegy, which was composed for this work by Kinana Buafach, and is a chamber music elegy for 4 instruments and a voice, a soprano. And also at the ceremony, the written work of 2 poets and 1 novelist, Melvin Dixon, Ronaldo Arenas, and Christopher Coe, will be spoken aloud by 3 different readers. Those are my posthumous collaborators. Those are 3 authors who died in those early years of the AIDS crisis. And it was important to me to have posthumous collaborators in this piece. So the poetry and the music will be experienced there. We're also we just found late in the game this great poem by Cookie Mueller, who's known more as a John Waters actor, but who was an extraordinary writer. And Mueller's piece, her piece, will close the ceremony then. And this is my big invitation to everybody. At 3:30 at 1315 Spruce in Philadelphia, the procession will begin. And a team of 4 young musicians will lead us with a kind of a trombone and trumpet attenuated version of a very beautiful pop song from those early 80s years. And they will lead us down Spruce, over on Camac, up Pine, and then on 13th to the foot of the steps of the Church of St. Luke's and the Epiphany. And the costuming, the urns, the shrouds will all move through the street as a public work of art. And then when we get to the church, there will be a multi-denominational group of clerics who will make a blessing for safe passage over the memories of these people. These are metaphoric remains. I've been receiving names from people as they send them to me of people they loved or people they knew who they wanted carried and remembered in this procession. I'm still receiving names. You can still send them to my Facebook really up until tomorrow morning. I inscribe those names on a piece of paper. I say them aloud as I write them. And then tomorrow I will burn those names and place those ashes in the urns. So we're carrying those ashes to the steps. Those clerics will make a blessing based in their faith or their philosophy over those memories. And then we'll invite people just to have a glass of lemonade the way you would after any memorial for that kind of necessary period of just sort of talking about what you've just seen and felt. So that's the piece, and it happens on Saturday, starting at 3:30 at William Way.
And then there's going to be a plaque at the church that will sort of be the final resting place.
There's a plaque that will commemorate these memories in the garden, I believe, of the church, or as part of their Tree of Life wall. I'll be taking the ashes themselves to Ocean City, New Jersey, and just kind of releasing them out into the sea.
And is this the video with Kenan?
This is the video with Kenan talking about his process of writing the elegy. Yeah, this is great.
In an elegy, you express your sadness or your deep thoughts towards the subject. I can think about both the AIDS crisis and the Syrian crisis too. And the more I think about it, like they just having like the word unclaimed. There was people that are still unclaimed. It's really amusing. So if I'm calm, what I was beginning to write the music, in the middle, I was very uncomfortable. Really, I'm really agitated. And in music, there is one of the marking or field that we would like for music is agitated. So this is maybe the first time I use it. So in the middle, actually, yeah.
So you got a little, it's here a little bit. And then happily, this is all being documented.
Yeah, I'm producing a documentary with the team from Greenhouse Media here in Philadelphia, which I'm guessing will end up being about a 15-minute movie about the process of making this thing and producing this thing, which hopefully will give other viewers who aren't here now some idea of what we did. That's been a really interesting process, and we're going to work with a drone, hopefully, to get really a shot of the whole procession. That's one of the reasons I really would love everybody, please come. I mean, I say this, the more people, the more light, but it's really true. The more people involved in this procession, the more it will be. So if you cannot be there, or also if you're just interested in seeing these objects up close in a quieter setting, today and tomorrow, today from 2 to 6, and tomorrow from 12 to 5, tomorrow Friday, the 24th, I will be at the William Way Center with these objects. You can listen to Kinan's beautiful piece on the listening stations. You can hear my 3 readers, Anne Ishi, Michaela Majoun, and Abdul Ali Muhammad read the work by these poets and novelists. At the listening stations, you can see the shroud, you can see examples of the costuming, you can see the urns. So the exhibit is there if you want to make contact with it in any way, today and tomorrow at William Way. And then the thing happens on Saturday.
And then next year in June, it will be on view at the festival.
Yeah, so Jennifer just recently told me we're going to have the opportunity to show the urns here at Clay Studio, which is a really nice, a meaningful coming home.
And I hope that we'll be able to show the video. And then you've talked about the idea that this is inspiring you into the future.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the utility of beauty. I always say, you know, if you're an artist, especially if you make objects, people often will ask you if they're really needed. And my answer has been for a long time now, well, if they weren't, you'd find societies that didn't make them. If they weren't necessary, there'd be some society somewhere where people just said, well, we're too busy hunting and fighting and gathering. We don't have time to put polka dots on a cup. But the truth is, you cannot find a human society that doesn't take a free 5 minutes and put dots on a cup. And that to me is the proof that there is something in the inexpressible that is necessary to us. In terms of this piece, I really thought about the fact that when you have to produce a memorial for lay people, or people I think of as civilians, people who aren't making art or working with art, it is the first time for many people that they have to have curatorial decision making. You have to choose a piece of music. You have to choose the way that urn is going to look. You have to choose the way the flowers are going to be. You have to choose the poem. You have to build, aside from dance, you're trafficking in almost every one of the arts. And that must be because those things are necessary, because they are poetic and they express something inexpressible. They help you give form or language to feelings which at that time of grief have no shape or form. And so it was very exciting to put art and craft to work in this way. I was really raised to be useful. My father was a child psychiatrist for underprivileged children. My mom was a learning disabilities teacher for kids who were dealing with all kinds of difficulties. And I was really raised with the idea that the best thing you could be was useful. And this show has been a really interesting opportunity for me to really pursue the idea of utility. The utility of beauty, the utility of craftsmanship. So I would like to do this, all of which is to say, I want to do it again. I can't wait to see the whole Frankenstein monster have all of its disparate parts and come to life on Saturday. I've never seen it alive. I've seen the pieces, but I never did this before. So I can't wait to see it merge and fuse and move in space. And then it has given me, the desire to take this curriculum to other places, other cities, other communities, and do it again, and watch what happens that time. I tried,
I hope that happens.
Me too.
And I'm glad we could loop back around to that idea of the utility of the material object and utility in the space of grief, and because you speak so eloquently about that. You use the word concretize the experience, loss, and remembrance, and that's really, I think, what you've accomplished, and what we will see on Saturday. Although in all its dynamic movement, it will be this real thing that, and that's what helps people. It's what helps people grieve and kind of have catharsis, which is so important at all times. And can't say especially now. Things are always hard everywhere, but we all need it.
I tried to give the artists a lot of space to talk about intermediary objects. A lot of them came to ideas of this angelic idea of an intermediary between the terrestrial and the celestial. But one beautiful thing that happened was that rage emerged, especially in the work of Kinana Buafach. And rage was such an important part of this moment. And it was the rage of people, especially I was part of ACT UP, it was that rage that fueled making things better, the utility of rage. So it's been interesting to leave it open-ended too, because there's loss, there's mourning, and like there is often with grief, there's real hot, palpable anger. So it's been interesting to watch these things be ingredients in a big pot.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to lunch. I didn't get any lunch, by the way. I just want to blow the lid off this thing. There is no lunch at Lunch and Learn. You don't get a hoagie, you don't get a cracker. I got a glass of water. Okay, so where's my lunch?
Cheesesteaks will come later.
Good.
From D'Alessandro's.
D'Alessandro's make the best cheesesteak in Philadelphia. That's what's true.
Does anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts they want to share?
I want to come back to this thing that you talked about back when the bodies were.
Not bodies, but remains.
Like
There were
ashes.
moments, this funeral director discussed moments where a family or a loved one had someone cremated and then did not return to pick up the ashes. I also heard a story from Wahida Shabazz El of going to a home and having people keep their distance from the ashes. And if you investigate the history of Potter's graves in the city of New York, people were wearing hazmat suits as they buried unknown people or homeless people who had died of AIDS, or people whose families had not been able to come for the bodies. Those bodies are buried in mass graves on little islands outside Manhattan, and the people burying them wore full hazmat while dealing with those bodies. And I haven't talked about this very much, but COVID was a very kind of perverse echo, down to having a president like Reagan, who did not wish to speak aloud of a disease, and who, by denying its existence, geometrically expanded its reach and caused many, many, many more people to die because of their unwillingness to lead their people and speak aloud about a disease. There was a lot in COVID too that really showed me, speaking of utility, the utility of compassion. That if you make all your decisions about an illness, about a pandemic, starting from the standpoint of what would I do if this disease was happening to my body, you will make better decisions. Less people will get sick, it will cost you less money, and the cure will be found faster. If you just make every single choice based on that idea, and that's the idea we still have yet to get to, that compassion is not like a cute thing that we learn in synagogue. Compassion has real functionality. Sorry.
No, that's very true. Anybody want to follow that up?
Yeah, I should see that.
That connection, Nicole.
Also, you mentioned angels and there's. What's it called, angels in there?
Yeah.
Tell us.
Yeah, Tony Kushner, in which the angels are actually characters in the play, moving back and forth, and communicating with the various characters. And I think that intermediary quality, that theme comes up again and again when artists are trying to talk about AIDS in a kind of a mysterious way.
Well, thank you again. This was thought-provoking and emotional as always, and I'm looking forward to Saturday. Come
Thank
on
you.
Saturday.
1315 Spruce Street, 3:30, Saturday, June 25th.
And if you have names, you can send them to Alex through his Instagram.
Alex Stadler artwork, I can receive them there, or waygate.org/remembrance.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye. Bye, Zoom people.